Hi everyone, thanks for joining in today. I'm Mariam. I am part of the product marketing team here, and I have Sandeep with me. He's our product manager, and he's also the owner for the audiences feature, right? Our entire audiences suite has honestly been one of our most asked about features, and that's why we wanted to actually host another session to just talk about how GTM teams are actually leveraging this. At a very broad level, audiences basically helps you find net new opportunities beyond your accounts that are already showing interest. So you can basically expand your outreach and generate new pipeline. Now there are multiple ways you can actually leverage this data. And in fact, we've been talking to a bunch of customers just to understand their use cases, how they've been implementing it, what's working, what's not working. And we've collected all of that learning and kind of put it into a GTM workflow that you can start implementing. And you can also adapt that workflow based on what is your business objective, right? And before I begin, just a few things. Feel free to unmute yourself at any point to ask any questions, or you can also use the chat box to type in your questions. And of course, as always, we're available on Slack and email if you have any questions after this webinar. And just a quick rundown of today's agenda. So I'll start with a quick intro on audiences, and then we'll get into the practical GTM use cases, followed by a live demo of how to actually build the audience on Reo. And we'll end with a Q&A where we'll take up any questions that you might have, right? So, to begin with, why we build this on a very light note. No, this is not just another feature that we've built. Like, honestly, everything we've built in Rio so far, like, it starts from that one single truth that developer GTM is very different, right? And that fundamentally changes how you actually run your GTM motion and generate pipeline. And this also includes identifying the right accounts and the right people to target. And we believe that's one of the most crucial steps in any GTM motion, any campaign, any outreach that you do. Once you get that right, everything else after that, it just kind of compounds itself, right? Now, when you define your ICP, like you already know your ICP, right? You know which skills a dev should have. You know the exact technologies that a company should be using that makes your product a great fit. But when it comes to the actual list building side of things, we end up like just resorting to firmographic filters because honestly, that's the most readily available data that we have. And that's a great approach if you're a non-dev tool company. But for dev tools, this definition of ICP does not really work always, right? The number one data point, which is the technologies that a company uses, that is something that really matters for dev tools. So imagine knowing which company uses a Pulumi or a HashiCorp or a GraphQL. So that tells you if there's an actual need or fit for your product. Knowing this tech stack gives you the exact pain points of that account, and it tells you the overall readiness of that account to even consider buying your product. And this is something that no firmographic filter can actually tell you. Now, having said that, it's not always easy to get this data because the way lists are built and the tools that are used, and in all transparency and honesty, right? With regular tools like Apollo and ZoomInfo, they do provide this data, but the actual coverage and volume is not as accurate and deep, right? In fact, we did this head-on comparison of data on ZoomInfo and Apollo, and what we realize is that they do cover the broader technologies, but again, like in terms of the volume, it's not as much. And as you go deeper into the technologies, right? If you look at MLflow, Kubeflow, Pulumi, LandGraph, Kafka, the data is just not out there, right? And this is honestly the reason why we built out audiences, right? Now, there are three types of audiences on Rio. There's company audience, which basically helps you find a list of accounts based on the technographics and the hiring intent signals. We have over 34,000 developer tool technologies that we cover, and you can build like very targeted account lists based on that. Then there's a developer audience, which basically helps you find developers based on their very specific skill sets. And what makes this particular feature very unique is you're finding developers not just based on like a job title or a designation or a seniority level, because those filters don't really give you the full context on the actual developer skills, which is where developer audience comes in. And again, there are more than 40,000 developer skills that we've been able to map from multiple sources like GitHub, Stack Overflow, and LinkedIn. And finally, there's the buyer audience, which is simply like pulling out all the buyers from either an existing account segment that you have, or account list, or even a company audience that you create, right? So this was about like all the three audiences that we have. Now getting into like the real meat of things, which is the GTM use cases, right? Like how sales and marketing teams are actually leveraging audiences. Like honestly, there is no one way or best way to do this. Right from running a full blown ABM motion to something as specific as a competitor takedown campaign, or like even building an invite list for an upcoming event, right? So there are endless possibilities of the use cases with audiences. But what we'll talk about today is like just the broader GTM workflow, which is more like a modular workflow, which you can tweak and adopt and adapt based on whatever your objectives or goal with audiences is, right? So first thing first, it starts with, of course, building your entire target account universe, right? Which is basically starting with creating a company audience. Now, there are multiple approaches you can take to creating a company audience. Let's just say, let's take an example of a MLOps tool, right? So you can build out a company audience based on accounts or companies that are using a complementary tech stack. When I say complementary tech stack, what I mean is a tool that makes your product a great fit, right? Or it integrates well with it. Like in the MLOps example, that would be probably companies using like a TensorFlow or a PyTorch. An easy way to do this is basically look at all your existing customers, the high LTV customers, identify their tech stacks, and then find accounts with those exact tech stacks. So this is basically like the equivalent of building a lookalike list of companies, right? And in another scenario, what you could do is simply find all accounts using a competitor tech stack. In this case, like for the MLOps tool, it would probably be a MLflow or Kubeflow, right? Now, building a competitor audience list would depend also on how easy it is for account like companies to switch from the competitor to your product, right? Like what are the switching costs, what is the effort? And if it's a if your product is like a easy rip and replace tool, then like building a company audience based on competitor tech stack is a great way to go about it. In fact, we've seen a customer do this exact use case. So they've pulled out just companies using a very specific competitor, and they simply plugged it into a LinkedIn campaign. And that's all they've done. And the response that they've got is really great because those are specific accounts. They are facing those specific challenges, right? So it's just easier to get the response from those accounts. Now, once you've built out a company audience, the next step is to also find the relevant people within those accounts, which are your developers and buyers. So from within a company audience, you can then find the developers and the buyers within those accounts. So this is basically your entire ICP universe where you have your accounts, you have the developers, you have the buyers. Now the next step here is to run targeted campaigns. We suggest doing this via LinkedIn and email because these are two channels that offer the most precise way to target specific people, right? If you're running a LinkedIn campaign, there are some best practices that we've seen work well. One is if you've built out multiple audiences, right? Let's say you've built out an audience based on a complementary tech stack, and you've also built out an audience based on a competitor tech stack. So have separate campaign groups for both of these audiences because essentially the pain point and the messaging would be very different for each of these audiences. And secondly, have different campaigns for developers and buyers because simply because the way developers and buyers evaluate a product or the entire buying journey, it is very distinct for these two personas. So essentially, your entire messaging framework should resonate individually with each of these personas, right? And it should directly speak to their pain points. So this is like the most simplest workflow with audiences, which and these are quick wins, right? You build out your company audience, you find the relevant developers and buyers within those accounts, and then you put them into your LinkedIn ad campaigns and email nurture campaigns. So you're basically generating awareness within accounts who might have a need of your product, but they're not really aware of your product right now. And that's what these campaigns help with, right? Expanding your entire top of the funnel audience, basically. Now, if we go a little deeper into the intent signal side of things, which is essentially what you're using Reo for, right? And honestly, like company audience and the entire audience's suite, it beautifully fits into the intent signals, right? So once you've started running your campaigns, you also want to track the accounts that are showing some activity. And this you can do by creating a segment. So you can create a segment on Reo with like using the source filter, and all those accounts within this audience that are showing some activity, like they've interacted with any of your product assets, so all of those accounts will be surfaced in that segment. So then you can start tracking the different intent signals to figure out what you need to do next with those accounts. Like at a very basic level, let's just look at three buckets, right? If there's a high intent account where maybe there's a surge in activity, the activity score is high, there are multiple developers evaluating your product or visiting certain key pages, right? So essentially these could be high intent accounts, and you would want to assign them to your sales team, and they can then find buyers from those accounts and reach out to them. Then there are the warm accounts bucket, which is basically accounts that are showing some early signs of interest, not yet there to talk to sales, but they've engaged with you in certain ways. And you want to keep running retargeting campaigns and nurture campaigns on those accounts. And then the third bucket is basically your cold accounts where there has been barely any activity, but since these are potential ICP accounts, you still kind of want to keep running soft touches to them. Now, this is basically how the entire GTM workflow will look like if you use audiences and combine it with intent signals, right? This is like a end-to-end GTM motion. Now, having said this, the buyer journey and the developer journey is anything but linear for dev tools, right? I mean, it's not like developers just move from one funnel to the other. So the kind of intent signals you track, what makes an account a high intent account, that will largely depend upon the nature of your business and your tool, right? But overall, this is how you can combine audiences with your intent signals and like run a full blown GTM motion on it. And even if there are individual campaigns that you want to run, right, it's fairly easy to just build out that account list on Reo and then export that list by downloading the CSV and then plug it into any campaigns that you're running. In fact, for accounts that have started showing activities, right? Once you create a segment and that segment is populated with those active accounts, you can also leverage the like Reo's integration with Zapier and Webhook to kind of push this data out to your other tools like La Growth or HeyReach, right? So there are multiple ways you can like further reach out to these accounts. Um, this is just a sample playbook of what we discussed, right? Like for marketing teams, it's basically building out your audiences. So there are 3 4 types of audience groups that you can build out. Maybe start out with 1 or 2 audiences just on complementary tech stack, 1 or 2 other audiences just for competitor tech stack if that's applicable to your use case. Then you set up LinkedIn campaign groups for each of these audiences and have like a separate messaging and campaign for each, right? And then you run ads with the brand awareness objective on LinkedIn. And initially, you want to ship as many ads as possible, like maybe 20, 30, 50, and constantly optimize for the CTRs there, right? And finally, you come back to Reo, track the intent signals, and then decide what needs to be a like what's the next step and how to re-engage or like what next needs to be done with those accounts. So it's like building awareness, generating demand, expanding your top of the funnel audience, and then using intent signals to prioritize your account outreach, right? I just wanted to also put this in. This is basically like some inspiration for LinkedIn ads, right? If you run, we have this entire ad library just combining all like good DevTool ads. And I'll drop in this link in the chat box. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight this if you're looking for some inspiration on running ads. Now coming to the sales team. So for sales team, what we've usually seen work really well is specifically buyer audience, because it kind of helps them find the relevant decision makers in the account, and it significantly speeds up prospecting. And again, the way you use buyer audiences, there can be multiple use cases here. One of the very simplest ones is like if you have an assigned account segment on Reo already, so you can just create a buyer audience on top of that assigned account segment. I'll show how you can do that in our demo also. But yeah, you build that buyer audience from your assigned account segment, and then you can do your daily account research, figure out which accounts are showing high intent, and then you can continue your daily prospecting, like find and outreach those buyers and developers. And this you can do within Reo.Dev itself. So there's basically no tool switching, no going to LinkedIn sales nav to find the relevant buyers. So every buyer that you find from that account segment is automatically populated in within an account in the prospects tab. So that's one way to look at buyer audience. The other another way is creating a buyer audience for a company audience. In that previous workflow that I showed you, right? So once you create a company audience, then you create a segment of that company audience. So now you can build a buyer audience also on that segment. So any accounts that are showing high intent, you can fetch all the buyers from those accounts and do an email mass outreach. Or so these are like the most used use cases across sales team. Another one is if you're running a very cold outbound motion, you can just simply find buyers from a company audience, irrespective of whether they've shown activity or not, and just enroll them in like a mass outreach to generate that awareness. So all in all, this is how this entire audiences and intent signals works for sales and marketing teams. For marketing teams, it's basically demand generation, and for sales teams, it's capturing demand from the high intent accounts and reaching out to them in a very timely and contextual manner. Yep. And now I'll just quickly get into the demo. Just give me a moment. Sorry. Are you able to see the Rio dashboard?
Yes, Mariam.
Awesome. Right. So I'll just quickly jump into the demo. I'll keep this short and we can take up any questions you have after this. So just a quick note. So audience is currently available only for users who have admin roles on Rio. So in case you want to access audiences, just ensure that your role is an admin role in Rio. You'll find audiences in the left navigation panel under tools. There's the audiences section. Once you click here, you land on the company audiences page. And we'll just start by creating an audience. I'll actually use the same example that I mentioned. Let's assume you're an MLOps tool and we want to build out a audience based on a complementary tech stack. So I'll probably look at companies using TensorFlow, and then there's PyTorch, right? You can layer this in with firmographic filters to kind of make this list a little more refined. As an example, let me look at a bracket of 200 to 5,000 employees for revenue. I'll just add a range here also. Right. And then there's a hiring intent where you can basically specify the seniority and job titles that these companies are hiring for, and also add in the hiring period, right? If you want to look at companies hiring for this particular tech stack in the last 90 days or 180 days, basically adding this hiring intent kind of shows you that there is a demand for these technologies, right? I'll just quickly run a preview here. This will take up a few seconds because there's a lot of data loading. Yep, there it is. So here, basically, you can see that for these particular filters, we've been able to find around 2,800 companies. And this is just a limited preview of all these accounts. You can see the last job posted date here. You can also click on any of these jobs to see the exact, like the entire job posting. Like over here, if you see, these are like they are hiring for experience with ML frameworks, including TensorFlow. So you'll be able to see all of this. Now, once you've seen this preview, you can click on continue to save. Um, Give your audience a name. You can choose to define the number of companies you want to save for this particular audience, right? Like as an example, we could take 100. I will not go ahead and save this audience because this takes like a it takes some time to populate. But as an example, I've already created this audience beforehand before this webinar. Yeah, this is the one, right? So TensorFlow and PyTorch companies, right? It's with the exact same criterias that I added in the demo, right? Now, once you've built this audience, you can view all the companies within this, right? And you can get all the details of the company LinkedIn profile, their website, the match technologies, the match jobs, last posting date, all of that, right? Now, once you create a company audience, you can also send this entire data directly to your CRM. And we've also recently introduced the ability to actually clone this audience. If you want to create like multiple audiences with the same firmographic filters, but just with different tech stacks, so you can simply clone the audience and change the tech stack. It just saves up time. That's all. And now, after creating a company audience, you can then find developers and buyers within this company audience. So let's take the example of finding developers. I'll just click on find developers here, which basically takes me to this create developer audience page. Now, as a skill set, I will use the exact skill sets, like the tech stack that we use there, right? Like developers skilled at TensorFlow and PyTorch, right? Here you'll see that this automatically gets populated. So basically, we are fetching developers from this company audience, and you can further add your job titles, country, and states if that's important. Again, this is going to be a limited preview of the developers from these companies. You will be able to access their contact IDs like LinkedIn and emails, and we've also like put in the skill source, basically where we've pulled out these skills from, right? So it's LinkedIn, GitHub, Stack Overflow, and Twitter, right? So once you've put in all your criterias, you can do a preview. So that data that you saw, that is basically like a auto-populate data. Now, after clicking on the preview, this is the data that I have gotten, right? And we'll just click on continue to save. It's again, this flow is similar to what we did for company audience. You define your audience name, you define the number of like the maximum developers you want to save for this audience, and you can choose to either just pull out their LinkedIn IDs, or if you want LinkedIn and business email IDs both, that would the credit costs would be different. Again, I'll not go ahead and create the audience because it takes some time. But once you've defined all of this, you can simply click on save audience. Once you've done that, you will be able to see the developer audience in this developers tab here. So this was the one that I had created for this. Again, you can click on view developers, and once this loads, you can basically see all the developers that we fetched for this particular audience, right? And yeah, again, for this, you can download the CSV. You can send it to your CRM. You can, again, clone the audience. And you can also directly enroll them in the existing email sequence that you have by clicking on create campaign. So this will basically take you to Reo's create like campaigns feature, where you can directly enroll this entire developer audience into a campaign that you might have running on like Apollo or Outreach or Salesloft, right? Uh, and finally, there's the exact same workflow of finding buyers within a company audience. We'll click on find buyers here. again, you can see it's automatically sourcing it from the audience we created. A very critical step here is to define your buyer persona. So you can either, if you have a predefined buyer persona, you can choose it from this drop down list, or you can create a persona from scratch so that you can fetch buyers that match your exact ICP persona. Again, the workflow will be pretty similar. You click on continue to save, add in your audience name, choose the number of buyers you want to fetch from each company. And again, you can choose to use only the LinkedIn, get only the LinkedIn ID or the LinkedIn and business email ID both. And you can save your audience. And the actions are pretty much similar to what you can do for developer and company audience, right? You can send this data to your CRM. You can enroll them through into any existing email sequence through the campaigns feature, right? And you can clone those audiences. So this was the entire demo on buyer, like the entire audiences suite. Um, I would also just take a moment to show you how to create a segment for audiences. So you'll again find segments here in the left navigation panel. We'll just click on create segment. As an example, I'll just create a basic account segment. So under the filters, you will see audiences as a source listed here, and you can simply choose a company audience or a developer audience. So any accounts that start showing some activity will be surfaced in this segment. And in case you are looking to track very specific activities in those accounts, you can always use more filters. But as a starting point, we would suggest just use company audience as a filter and then track the intent signals on those accounts. Yep, so that was on the demo, and I think with this we come and end to our session. Any questions here? I'll just stop sharing my screen, sorry. Yep. I am giving back 15 minutes to everyone. But yeah, any questions so far? I see a couple of questions on the chat. Okay, most of this has been answered.
The one question is, how is your tech stack coverage so high? So I'll just take one by one. So their tech stack is present in company audience and also present in developer audience that we have. So for company audience, we rely on mostly jobs data. So what we do is we scrape jobs from more than 15,000 jobs providers and understand the meaning of that job description, extract relevant tech stack from those job descriptions and index in our database. That seemed to us, that seemed to be the most reliable way of getting tech stack data based on user research, and that is why it is so high. We do a lot of cleaning in the data as so that false positives don't come up. But yeah, the main reason of our tech stack coverage being so high is the source of the data, and hence the reliability part itself as well. I hope that answers your question. Is in the company audience, if you want tech stack to be recent one, which has been recently mentioned in job postings, you can use the hiring period location. Say companies having a very niche tech stack such as Terraform, which is an infrastructure as code dev tool. Say companies having Terraform as a tech stack and been hiring for developers with skill set Terraform in the last, let's say, 3 months or 30 days. So that can give you like more precise um, um, list which you can go after.
Any more questions? Anything else that you would specifically like us to cover on, especially like on the demo part of things? Also, we're like, if there are any specific use cases that you have in mind and you would like to implement, happy to like walk you through it and like figure out how we can do that on Rio, right? Because again, like I mentioned, the possibilities are endless with audiences, right? Like you can get into very very one-off specific use cases also, if that's what you're looking at. What we shared today was like a broader GTM workflow, right? Which is more like a modular workflow, and you can just pick and choose like what you want to implement from that, right? But happy to walk through and discuss any specific use cases you have in mind. Cool. I think we're good to go. So everyone has like free 10 minutes now. Thanks everyone for joining in. Thank you. Okay, there's someone typing. Okay, thanks. Have a good day. Bye
Thank
bye.
you, everyone.